started doing ceramics about when I moved to Southend, because I moved on my own and I didn't know anyone. And I kind of just, I was in a place where I was writing this PhD in the daytime, and then in the evenings I just needed something to do, and I wanted something to do that was not about writing or research and that used a different part of my brain. I did an art GCSE, but like my school didn't really have any resources to do things like pottery. Like it was too messy, too expensive. So I never touched clay at all in my youth, apart from like probably some air dry clay. And there was a woman in Southend at the time running it. She sort of runs an open studio, basically. So it's not a formal teaching setting. You go to her and you say, right, I want to make this. She says, okay, I'll show you how to make it. And then you learn the skills that you need to make whatever you want to make. So she kind of, she'd only just got started when I joined. So there was me and about 3 other people. And then over the years, sort of the last 5 or 6 years, she moved into a shipping container, basically, in the marina near where she lives. And sort of then the studio grew, and like the people grew and changed and all this sort of stuff. But it's always been this you've kind of got to, it's not, nobody lasts very long who says, tell me how to do this. You have to say, right, I want to make some cereal balls. I need some cereal balls. She's like, okay, this is how you do that. So I'd sort of been going there like really religiously for about 5 years. And then obviously lockdown happened, and you cannot just be sharing wet clay with people when there's a virus around. Like it's one of the most difficult things to make COVID safe. And she did manage to do some properly socially distanced sessions where people were going, and she did the most amazing thing, which was like, you know, people were getting emergency drops of beer or whatever, but she went round some of the more regular people's houses and just literally like dropped a bag of clay on people's doorstep when lockdown happened, just like 1 kilogram of brown mud on your doorstep. My neighbours must have thought, what is this? And then just like left without even knocking on the door, and text me saying there's something on your doorstep. It's like these really secret drops of clay. So I did stuff with that, and I managed to do 1 session. But apart from that, I just feel quite frustrated about not being able to do it at home, because a kiln isn't really expensive, not just to buy, but to run it. It's quite technical. And without a kiln, you can't, it's really difficult to do anything. You can manage without a wheel, but you can't really manage without a kiln.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I thought you surely needed the wheel. I mean, how does it work without the wheel?
Well, so wheel thrown pottery is just kind of one sort of pottery. So like, you know, a bowl, a cup, anything that's circular, like might be wheel thrown. But then anything, you know, sculptural, or even actually other different types of things might be using different techniques. So you can use molds, which is basically a plaster mold where you'd throw a flat bit of clay into it. There's coiling, which is where you get loads of like sausages and like pile them on top of each other, and then sort of skim them all together with your thumb. And so there's all these different techniques. So there's loads and loads you can do without a wheel. Like I think lots of people think pottery is just a wheel, but that's kind of more associated with what I'd call like studio pottery, which is, you know, mugs and bowls and plates and things like that.
So if it's not studio pottery, what is it? Is that just straight pottery, or?
I think it depends what you're making, really. I definitely don't subscribe to like one technique. Some people are, you know, studio potters might not always be using a wheel, but I think mainly the difference in pottery and ceramics is the difference between whether you're making sort of fine art or sort of things with a practical purpose. So but it's quite a broad, weird church because it's a craft basically. So craft has the same problem, had the same problem as photography, with being incorporated into the fine art world, really. And I would say it is now, and it's really popular now, and that's probably why I originally got involved with it, because there was a bit of a renaissance. But my tutor, for example, said sort of 15 years ago they were thinking that all the potters would die out because mass manufacture for things like a fancy mug taken over.
So it's having a resurgence then?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot more. Even in the last 6 years, there's a lot. I notice a lot more people coming through the studio, and I think generally just there's the trend for like a bigger trend towards people making things like knitting. Like pottery is a big part of that sort of scene, like knitting, quilting. I'm trying to think of other things like lino cuts, these things that I think get, you see a lot on Instagram or something. And then there's the pottery throwdown, it's like this spelling bee or bake off but for pottery.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's done a lot actually. Like, it's not a massively popular one, it's not as popular as a bake off or anything, but I think it's done a lot for getting people interested in it, because you get to see how things work a bit more.
So have you got some examples of your pottery there?
Yes.
Yeah, Ace. Let's have a look. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, so I'm trying my best not to turn pottery into my job, because I have a habit of doing stuff, getting really into it, and then turning it into part of my job. So I'm trying not to do that, but I'm not doing very well. But that basically means I'm not really making stuff with an eye to selling it. So I kind of just go with whatever I'm feeling like at the moment. So what I've brought is, so I do try and make things for the house, because I like having stuff around that is handmade. And also I'm paying for the classes. If I get some crockery out of it, then that saves me loads of money, or that's my argument anyway. So I think lots of people start it thinking that to make something good, you have to be, you have to be some sort of, as good as an oil painter would be to make a proper painting. But it's not like that at all. Like, it's really tactile, and it's really based on like muscle memory and your interaction with the material. So you can talk like it. What I find really fascinating is as a writer, is trying to describe these processes that I'm learning and that I know now, because there's all sorts in it that is stuff that I've learned that is not about words, or it's not verbal. So, and I can describe it to you, for example, these processes, but I didn't understand what leather hard was until I'd held a pot that was leather hard and tried to carve into it or turn it 10 times. And you kind of just learn these things like this kind of muscle memory or tacit knowledge or something about the texture or the feel of something, or even like the smell of it sometimes, or the sound of it when you're working with it, that tell you when things are going right, and they tell you when things are going wrong. And it's just like a building up of these like processes, and repeating these processes that teaches you how to do stuff like that. But that bowl is not it looks really nice over Zoom, but there's lots of things wrong with it, but I'm not really bothered about that. Like, I know there's loads of things wrong with it. Like, it's thrown and the walls are like thinner here and then they go really thick and then they go thin. Like, that's a badly thrown bowl, but practically it fits my pasta in it and it holds it, so I'm not bothered, and it looks nice.
yeah like a piece of music, the flaws are what makes it. Yeah,
and I think there's a big thing as well where, like, I'm interested in the process of it for me, like, and the experience of it. Like, I'm not really trying to make a perfect symphony for somebody else. I'm just trying to make something that means that I could spend 2 hours not thinking about my phone or the internet or work or emails or anything. It's really hard to touch your phone when your hands are covered in clay. So it's really useful.
So it's a very primal, very human thing to do. Because it engages all the senses as well.
Definitely, yeah, it really, really does. And the thing you say about primal, I think, is really one of the things that I find most compelling about it, and that I've started writing a little bit about, which is the idea that, like, especially if I'm sort of sculpting a form with my hands, like that is a process that goes back to the earliest human pre-agrarian civilizations. It's like 25, I think the oldest female form is like this sort of Venus figure. So I started making, so I got interested in those Venus figures really, because they take all different forms, and there's those really bulbous ones that are kind of thought to be these fertility ones, but I think that's a bit of an arbitrary conclusion to come to. There's a recent archaeological suggestion that they're not fertility figures, but actually self-portraits of. So somebody wrote a paper about the downward. If you're a pregnant woman, what you look like from your own eyes, looking downwards at your own body, basically. And it's exactly the form of that Venus. It's incredible. And archaeologists, because they're going so far back, it's just really, you have to be so, it's almost like you sort of on a wing and a prayer. There's no solid answers. And they've always been talked about as fertility goddesses. And they might have been, but also I love the idea that they might have been self-portraits of women, like, and that's from, I think it's 25 to 28,000 years ago, like, and I can sit here, I can sit in my studio and I can make one of those forms, and it's the same process. It's exactly the same. Like, I might have an electric kiln and the clay might be slightly different, but essentially it's a person making a form, and there's not many things, I think, where you can replicate an experience like that. I just find that incredible.
So have you got any there, like any sort of non-bowl pottery? Ceramics.
So as I was that research, that sort of thinking and research, then I started making these little forms that are from ancient Mycenae, which is where they thought Troy was. And there's all these figures with their arms up and sort of these female figures, and they've got little boobs and these little headdresses on. And I started making them to sort of just try and think, or not think, but make all these female forms and what it'd be like. So they look like this. So they're just like tiny little sort of talisman figures, and the face, like, this is quite an old one where I wasn't very good at making them. These are quite old ones. And then there's ones in like this shape as well.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I've just been making those compulsively for a while, and now they're all over my house, and lots of my friends well. But I'm interested in them as like there were those figures that you've seen in museums, so they're like my weird replication of those, but those figures you see in museums were actually they're kind of found everywhere in sort of archaeological sites in ancient Greece, and they were just found in kind of religious settings, in burials and things like that, but also in domestic settings. So people would use broken ones as like bottle stoppers and things like that. So they're almost like, the only equivalent I can think of is sort of like a sort of a Mary figurine in a Catholic country or something, just everywhere, like completely on everything. And they have a mood about them, and each one that I make ends up with its own little character. And it usually looks like one of my friends or something, so I send it to them. And then so and I love them, and they do feel like talismans, and I like the idea of doing this process that people have been doing for like thousands and thousands of years, and I don't seem to be able to stop doing it.
And what other things do you make?
What else am I making? So the first proper project that I made, and this was massively fueled by my tutor saying, really encouraging us all to keep a sketchbook, and really supporting anyone's mad ideas. So in my studio, people make all sorts. Like some people make like bowls, vases, cups, things like that. There's a woman who started around the same time as me, who makes loads of things. She goes to shows, artwork things, and I think lots of people at the studio do this, where they go to a shop or they go to an art thing and they think, oh, I like one of those, and you look at it, and if you've been going long enough, you know if you can replicate it, like, sort of bootleg it for yourself. So she sort of bootlegged like this massive avant-garde jug for herself, like sort of this big. She made all these huge stacking pebbles for the garden. There used to be this woman that came who was interested in, she was amazing. She was interested, a very sort of really sweet, quite sort of mischievous, quiet lady I think in her 60s. And she was like, Jennifer, there's only two things I'm interested in: ancient Korean pottery and penises. And she made like she made these huge moon vases, which are traditional Korean pots, like really large rounded vessels. And also she made like she would make these jugs where the handle was basically a phallus. It's just like, yeah, cool, come knock yourself out. It's really good.
Yes, fair enough. Yeah.
So that's, yeah, I quite like the idea that people would just feel like free enough to be like, yeah, that's what I'm into and that's what I'm here to make. Like, and I like that atmosphere.
Is there quite a variation of characters that go to pottery then?
Yeah, definitely. And I liked it because I didn't really know anyone in Southend at the time, and I was kind of on my own. So it kind of gave me a sort of grounding, and it gave me a routine as well, because I didn't really have one. So the only thing that I did once a week was go to this class. But the first proper project that I did, after like making a few bits of plates and cups and things like that, and learning about the different clays, was this project, which now I think about it was a bit ridiculous and also completely pointless, and now I don't know what to do with it. Was like a Japanese tea set based on, do you know the Beaufort scale of weather? So the Beaufort scale is like a 12-point scale of how good or bad the weather is, and it's a really sensory sort of scale. And I was kind of reading about it a lot at the time, so I decided to make this tea set of like 12 cups and 12 sort of saucers, things like long rectangular saucers, but each saucer is a different number on the Beaufort scale. And now I made it. It was great. I really enjoyed it. But now they're completely impractical. I just have this box, and it's actually in this room, and I've got one out to show you.
Are you going to continue like this, or have you got like ambitions?
Well, I think, like I said, like I don't intend to ever leave this shipping container that I go to and the tutor that I go to, because it's just a space that is one that is about happiness, actually, for me now. But then I am really interested. I found a lot of because I did get interested in it and start reading about it, but I got quite frustrated with how little in the way of contemporary writing there is that is actually kind of for a non-academic or non-archaeological or that's not about a 5-step how to make a pot thing. So there's lots of instructional, lots of quite in-depth historical or collectory type things. There's not really anything that talks about the sensory stuff or the amazing. It's kind of a history of the world, like, if you start thinking about it, it'll blow your mind. So, I mean, like, wherever you're sat now, if you have a mug near you, if you've got a toilet, if you've got drain pipes, it's all made of pottery. And so it's this material that is literally earth, it's extremely elemental, and we fix it with fire, remove the water, so we fix it with fire. And then but it's something, so it's kind of has this profound thing, so because it connects you with people 30,000 years ago, if not more, but at the same time it's just something that you just is around you every day, like you just don't even take notice of. I'm really interested in all those connections, really. And I haven't really, there are some good writers on ceramics and pottery and the histories of these things, because they also trace like trade routes. If you have any blue and white pottery, any sort of chintzy china, that trace that in that one pot, there is a history of the West trading with the East and those interactions and sort of a history of like colonialism and trade and decoration and art and all these, and politics as well. So I'm really interested in all those connections, and there are some books that do it, but I kind of want to try and write a bit about some of that stuff. But it's all
I used to like it, reading about ancient cities like or places like that, when they used to go through all the layers of pottery, and about 10 foot of pottery going back hundreds of years, when they could trace the whole history of the city through its like bowls.
And that's because they were fixing it with fire, and then it becomes like this eternal material that means that you, this far down the line, can still understand something about what people ate in Babylonia. Like, that's wild.
It is, isn't it? Something you don't even think about ends up being the fingerprint of the culture.
Yeah, and there is that sense in which I think we've all been to loads of boring museums where we see fragments of pottery. I remember that, going to quite crap 1980s museums where you just see, another bit of pot, but actually in that little fragment there's something much more interesting to be said about it.
I love the big pots where they keep olive oil in them, and then you imagine the boats with about 100 of these on going across the Mediterranean, and
and
the pots developed and changed, the handles change and the rims change, and there's a whole history in the pot itself.
And I love that idea as well of like you said, the way the decoration and handles changed, kind of being about almost just like fashion. Like, it just realized people weren't actually that much different to the way we are now in lots of ways.
That's the most powerful message you get, actually, that the more things change, the more things actually do stay the same, don't they?
I read something about there was something to do with a find where they knew that somewhere was like a big social event space or a public space because there was lots of disposable pots. So instead of having plastic cups, they would just have disposable, basically easily thrown like clay cups that you basically fast food was served in. So you've got this so imagine this like ancient football game or something where you get your mead in a really scruffy clay pot and then you just throw it away. And there's something really interesting about that. The way we you can transpose that sort of social eating, drinking space onto now and then, and also the how sort of the disposability of it as well was like the same but different. It would be better if we were all still using clay because it has another use than plastic.